Hello, I am the awful chef. I eat, therefore I cook. Today we're going to try to make some bread. So break out the scales, the stand mixer, the measuring cups, the thermometers, the timers. Yeah, not so much. We don't do that around here. This is my second attempt at making this video. The first time I unintentionally highlighted my weight loss. I have successfully lost about 65 pounds on a semi-vegetarian diet over the past 2 years. So, in making this revised version, I've fixed a problem. I didn't realize how poorly my clothes were fitting last time. So, that wonderful bit of news that you really didn't need to know set aside, let's make some bread. So, here we go. Pardon the motion sickness there with my expensive production setup. I'm using a glass bowl to highlight the situation. So let's start with some water, huh? Here. Yeah, half a cup of water. I actually did measure that out, but I am making a point. And the point is that life is what you make it, and bread is little more than library paste with a yeast infection. So there's our water. We are actually going to be making 3 types of bread today. If I were to make flat bread, I would not put in any yeast. The other 2 types of bread, the French baguette and the Italian restaurant bread, I do use yeast. So let's put in my scientific yeast. Yeah. That is half a tablespoon, not teaspoon. That was a mistake I made in the first video. And now let's precisely measure in some salt. I prefer the non-iodized. Yeah, that was a precise measure of salt. Yeah. So there you go. So if I were making a French baguette, that would be it for the yeast and water and all of that. And I'd simply add bread flour. Oh, pardon me. And mix it appropriately. But because I'm making an Italian restaurant bread, or a flavored bread, I want to add a few more things. So let's perfectly measure out some sugar. Oh yeah. And that is how you use a microgram scale to measure out the proper amount of sugar. How about some oil? Oil retards the gluten, but it provides a richness that I love. So a little olive oil. And again, you'll notice my precise measuring technique. And some vinegar. Some classic red wine vinegar. Yippee. Yeah, there you go, the exact amount. Now, in terms of measuring the water, I actually do like to measure that so I have a consistent amount of bread. Cooking for 2 people, quantities are important, and so yeah, I actually do measure the water and the yeast. But I'm making a point that as long as you use a semi-fixed amount, you'll have a fixed amount of bread. Now, you can see I'm pulling out the regular flour. And we are going to precisely measure the flour like that. Slug. And now we will break out my precision mixing tool like this. Yeah, keep in mind that bread is nothing more than library paste with a yeast infection. So you kind of just go with it. I will let you know that the flatbread would be made with self-rising flour instead of regular flour. And at this point would be about done. You can see we have a loose batter. Or pardon me, a firm batter or a loose dough, if you will. Yeah, this texture which you can see here, gloppity gloppity glop. It's kind of like a runny peanut butter at this point. Would be perfect. You shape that with very wet hands on a pan. It can be coated with parchment paper or simply greased with olive oil. Bake it at 400 degrees until it turns a little brown. Cover it with Parmesan. Bake it another few minutes. You have the most magnificent flatbread. And again, instead of using the regular flour, you use self-rising flour and skip the yeast. Okay, so this, unfortunately, is very, very sticky, which means it's not bread dough yet. Needs more flour. So the question is, how do you know how much flour to add? Quite honestly, the dough will tell you. Suspenders, gotta love them. Okay, what do I mean by the dough will tell you? Well, very simply, dough is not sticky. So when the mess in the bowl stops being sticky, it's dough. That's kind of zen, right? Now here, you're about to see it. If you look at this, you can see it's kind of sticky, but starting to slowly come together. With my scientific mixing tool, you can see it's still kind of sticky, but starting to really come together as a dough. So watch this. This is how I know it's a dough versus a batter. I can touch it. And as you see, it's still a little sticky, which means we need more flour before I do too much more of this. Yickety, yickety, stickety, stickety. So a little extra flour. Let me clean off my hand from that mistake. And watch my scientifically precise technique as I stab the flour into the dough. Yes. Okay, there we go. Much better. You can see that it's not really sticking as much. Well, you might be able to see that it's not really sticking as much to the fork. See? Yes, this is much less sticky, and there's leftover flour in the bowl. That's a surefire sign that the dough has absorbed as much flour as it really wants to, which typically works out to about 3 to 1. Okay, there we go. That's a good shaggy dough. Yeah, there we are. Okay. This is a very nice dough. You can see that I'm folding the dough as I mix it together. Usually I use a mixing bowl, which makes it slightly easier, but then, of course, you wouldn't see a thing on this YouTube video, which wouldn't be any good at all. So, here we are. As I fold the dough, I expose the wet middle, and I can roll that around in the loose flour in the bowl and pick up a little bit more. And here you go. Bread dough. Exciting, right? Like the way I precisely measured all the ingredients, did everything precisely correct, compensated for altitude and temperature and humidity, and came up with a blob of library paste that is thoroughly infected with yeast. So, what do you do now? Well, you can bake this up right off the bat. Start in a cold oven, 400 degrees, about half an hour. You'll have a very decent piece of bread. Or you take your exact scientific instrument called a soup bowl, put in a little olive oil. Yeah, this is so exciting, right? A little olive oil. Keep it kind of thin, you know. Throw your dough ball in the bowl. Cover it with plastic wrap, set it in the fridge overnight, take it out in the morning, shape it, bake it, bread. 400 degrees, cold oven. Start with a cold oven. That way the yeast has a chance to just spring to life inside the oven before it finally hardens. There is a third option that does make a little bit of a better bread, but it's not absolutely essential. And in my, well, you can see, here's our dough. Cover that with plastic wrap, put it in the fridge, you're good. Pull it out the next morning, you have fresh bread for breakfast. Nobody likes that, no. Okay. So, what comes out looks kind of like this. Now, I will say that I tended this dough. What I mean by that is that I put it on the counter underneath a wet paper towel instead of plastic wrap. When it rose to the point that it was touching the paper towel, I folded it down, wadded it up, and then just did that a couple of times. And then when I went to bed, I covered the bowl in plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator. Pulled it out this morning, let it sit a bit, shaped it, baked it, 400 degrees, half an hour. And this is what I get. You can hear the crust. Oh, that is perfect. See? There you go. Bread. Just library paste, the yeast infection, and you're good. For a French baguette, use bread flour, water, salt, and yeast. For flatbread, self-rising flour, water. I like mine with salt, oil, vinegar, and a little bit of sugar. Flatten it out, bake it, coat it with Parmesan, finish it up. And for this, water, half a cup, half a tablespoon of yeast, salt, sugar, oil, vinegar. About a cup and a half of flour is how it usually works out. But what you do is you just mix it until it's pick-upable, and you'll have bread. Bake it, 400 degrees, half an hour, start from a cold oven. Parchment paper is nice. It's not absolutely required, though. So that's it. Thank you. Goodbye.